the name that appears in your little Hollywood squares tells us your name, just so that we know who everyone is. That would be great. Thank you. And we still have just a couple of more minutes, and then we'll get started. There's Father Chris coming on. Hi, Chris.
Well, this is like a Southern Maryland reunion.
This is great.
To see all of you.
It's pretty intense. It's really nice to see everyone.
So I think it's just about 6:30, and we could probably get started. So I will turn it over to Peter Antocci, one of our regional deans. Peter.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our regional meeting this evening. I'm Peter Antocci, and I'm one of the regional deans. Happy to be your host for tonight's listening session, and also to be moderator when we open the virtual floor up for questions and comments on the proposed canon. So at this time, if you haven't done so, I do ask you to mute yourself until such time as you might be called on to raise your question. Now, we will take a look briefly at the summary agenda for this session. So in a moment, I'll open us with prayer, and then we'll hear from a member of the Advisory Committee on Diocesan Stewardship and Parish Vitality, and that person will introduce the proposed canon. Hopefully, you've all read both the text of the canon and the full report from the committee. It might be helpful to have that text in front of us for tonight's discussion, and we will post a link to that text in the chat. After the introduction from the advisory committee, we'll have a few words from our bishop, Marianne, and then we will open this up for discussion, and we'll have a few more guidelines for that when we get there. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? If you do, please type those in the chat. Okay then, not seeing any. Let us begin. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, we pray for your holy Catholic Church. Fill it with all truth, in all truth, with all peace. Where it is corrupt, purify it. Where it is in error, direct it. Where in anything it is amiss, reform it. Where it is right, strengthen it. Where it is in want, provide for it. Where it is divided, reunite it. And all for the sake of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. So at this time, I call on, I believe it's my co-dean, Reverend Greg Seiler from the advisory committee, to introduce the canon, the proposed canon.
Thank you, Peter. Hi, friends. My name is Greg Seiler, and I serve in St. Mary's County as the rector of Ascension in Lexington Park and St. George's in Valley Lee. And it's great to see all of your faces and be together. I also had the privilege of serving along with the Reverend Christian Lehrer from Baden and Thomasina Rogers from St. Thomas Croom on the advisory committee for diocesan stewardship and parish vitality. Just want to take a little while to kind of set the table, as it were, remind some of us who have been around this conversation for a while what is in this, and also bring up to speed those new among us, because I realize we may have some new clergy, wardens, and delegates on the call. And so welcome. So for all of them, as well as a reminder to us, the advisory committee was formed by a resolution that was passed at Diocesan Convention in January 2020. A copy of the resolution is included with the advisory committee's full report, and you can find that, I hope you have, on the special convention page of the diocesan website, www.edow.org. If you have not yet read the report from the advisory committee, please do so in the next few days. Essentially, though, the resolution asked the advisory committee to focus on some very important questions related to our common life and ministry. Questions such as these: what are the standards that constitute a viable parish? What are the standards and processes that should apply to parishes which are unable to fulfill their mission and canonical obligations due to financial challenges, due to secular factors? And what is the role of the diocese in providing support and exercising authority to those parishes that struggle to fulfill their mission and meet their obligations? So the advisory committee was formed in the spring of 2020. We met regularly into the fall. Each region of the diocese was well represented on the committee, and the full diversity of our Diocese of Washington was represented as well. As a result of our work, the advisory committee proposed this new canon that would effectively enable diocesan leadership to work proactively with parishes that are facing significant challenges, with the hope that diocesan support and guidance will lead a parish to renewed vitality. Right now, unfortunately, parishes often reach out to the diocese when it's too late, when the issues and the problems have grown so large that it's really hard to turn them around. Enabling the diocese to get involved sooner would not only help those parishes, but it would benefit the diocese as a whole, saving all of us valuable resources and maybe even saving our parishes. In proposing this new canon, the advisory committee wanted very much to respect the autonomy of each individual parish, while also honoring our shared responsibility and accountability to each other as members of the Diocese of Washington. The committee focused on developing language that was fair, flexible, and effective in addressing situations seen or envisioned. The criteria embedded in the proposed canon were developed by reviewing similar canons of other dioceses around the Episcopal Church, developed by knowledge of our diocesan community, and following the best practices for church governance, mission, and financial sustainability. Throughout the process, the advisory committee received input from diocesan leaders, including council and the regional deans. Now, I'd like to highlight a few important points in the proposed canon. First, the advisory committee was cautious about granting too much authority to the office of the bishop. Therefore, the proposed canon vests the decision-making power to the Council of the Diocese of Washington, a committee of clergy and lay representatives from each region of the diocese. The bishop's authority is mostly relegated to executing any recommendation by the council. Number 2, the advisory committee felt it was important that parishes which are the focus of a health and vitality assessment be given a voice in the process, and they will have a voice in the process. And as a result, any clergy or any vestry member of any parish undergoing an assessment will have an opportunity to share their views on the parish's health and vitality with the diocesan council. Third, the advisory committee considered whether specific metrics should be included in the standards of vitality, or whether the canon should be automatically invoked if the certain number of standards are not met as a parish. For example, should a certain average Sunday attendance be a standard of vitality? Or should action be taken if a parish does not meet 8 of the 12 standards of vitality? In both cases, the advisory committee believed the answer was no. The advisory committee felt that flexibility and process were of primary importance, rather than fixed objective criteria, and that any action steps by the council should be based upon trends within the life of the parish, rather than specific numerical data from one moment in time, because we know that noticeable trends allow for more effective assessment of a parish's overall health. And fourth and finally, while anyone in a parish may request a health and vitality assessment, such requests are made through the bishop, a member of diocesan council, or a member of standing committee. They are the only ones who are able to, as it were, invoke the canon. And then, as I stated earlier, diocesan council would be the body to decide whether to proceed with the next steps under the proposed canon. The advisory committee gave consideration to having others, such as wardens, vestries, and/or parishioners, be able to directly petition council for an assessment, but concluded that an overly wide range of petitioners could result in petty disputes, inadequately prepared petitions, or other inappropriate complaints being brought forward. Finally, in closing, let me say, in doing its work, the advisory committee took into account the revitalization component of our diocesan strategic plan, including the signs of parish vitality. The committee considered the proposed canon as a corollary to this revitalization initiative. The purpose of both, this canon, which we will discuss tonight and in these coming weeks, as well as the vitality and the initiative of vitality, the purpose of both is the total life and the health of our parishes and congregations, especially tonight as we consider our common life here in Southern Maryland. The goal is the overall health of our common life and ministry, done well to God's glory, done well together. Thanks so much for being here. I hope that these introductory remarks have kind of set the table, reminded you of where we've been, brought you up to speed if you're new to the conversation. I really look forward to a fruitful conversation tonight, in the weeks and months to come, and at our special convention on April 17th. Thank you to all who submitted requests and comments throughout the whole process that the advisory committee was meeting. We were just really blessed by your input, your interaction with us, and certainly your prayers. So thank you. As we proceed, I would like to invite Bishop Marianne, if you could say a few words.
Thank you, Father Greg. Thank you, Reverend Peter. I really appreciate all that you've done to bring us together in your roles as deans as well. And hello, everyone. Again, it's great to be with you. I have very little to say in except that I am here to listen, that the diocesan staff and your bishop have as our mantra a desire to serve the life and the well-being of all our congregations. And the times when we are invited in to be of assistance are often at the time, as Greg was saying, of acute crisis, usually of a financial nature, when a congregation hits a crisis point and they simply do not have the resources to undertake something that needs to happen, or when there is some kind of internal dynamic within the community that is holding it back, right? That there's just not clarity or consensus among the leaders as to how to go forward. And those times are the times when we are invited in. We try to do the help that we can, but it often can feel unsatisfying to the people that we work with if there isn't enough internal consensus among the body of the leaders in the church as to how to move forward. And so I simply share that with you as a reflection of the way that we are brought in now to assist when a congregation is really in dire straits. It usually surfaces to us as a money issue or as a conflict issue in the congregation. And as you know, when those times happen, everything else kind of just stops. It just kind of shuts down. I'm also aware that that there is a perception, a really deep-seated perception that somehow the diocese has the authority to shut congregations down, and we don't. And this canon doesn't actually allow, as Greg was saying, any one body of the diocese to make a decision on behalf of a congregation without input from a very broad group of people. Having said that, it is as I read the canon, it would be an act of trust and relationships across the wider community that would allow this canon, if it were to pass, to offer its greatest fruits. So my commitment to you is always to work on the relationships so that we have as healthy and as faith grounded relationships as we can, so that whenever we need to have really tough, challenging conversations, we do so in an atmosphere of trust and of common purpose. So with that said, I'd like to simply listen, and I'll answer any questions that seem directed at me, but I think the experts in the room right now are the people who have been working so hard to bring this proposed canon to us. So thank you, Greg and Peter, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Bishop Marianne. So now we'd like to open the floor for questions and comments. To help structure that discussion, I would first invite your questions or comments about the proposed canon overall. And then we will move into the proposed canon section by section after that. So if you have a question or comment about a specific clause or section of the text, please wait until we get to that point in our discussion. So as moderator, I will try to balance having a full discussion with questions and answers while also keeping my eye on the time and moving us along through the entire canon. So please know that if you do not get your question or comment voiced tonight, there will be an opportunity for you. There's always an opportunity to submit your question or your comment following this session. And Reverend Andrew Walter, our canon to the ordinary, will explain the process for doing that before we finish up tonight. So, I believe we have a slide on the Q&A instructions. So yes, please keep your audio on mute until you are called upon to speak. To do that, to ask a question, please type in the chat section, Q, your question, and I'll call on you in order. or comment, C, and I'll call on you in order. Now, if you are on the phone, just dial *9 to indicate that you have a question or comment. And we are asking for clarifying questions and comments. We're not asking for amendments at this point. So, when I call on you, that's the time to unmute. Please identify who you are and which congregation you're from, and then proceed with your comment or your question. So let's open the floor for overall comments and questions. And please go ahead and type into the chat. Now, I know that our Reverend Dean Greg Seiler is spectacularly clear. Apparently so clear that we have no comments or questions so far. Good job, Greg. Thank you.
My wife would disagree with that, but
before we move on, I'd like to ask our canon to the ordinary if we're ready to go to specific questions about sections of the text.
Thanks, Peter. Good evening, everyone. It's so good to be with you. Certainly, if the group doesn't have any sort of general comments or questions, we can move on to sections. But please, I would encourage everyone. This is an opportunity for the advisory committee to hear from all of you. So hopefully you've read the proposed canon. And please, we'd love to hear any questions or comments that you have. I serve as the staff liaison to the advisory committee, and I'm taking notes tonight, as I know Greg is and Christian as members of the advisory committee are. So this is really our opportunity to listen. So please go ahead and type into the chat. If there are no questions or comments overall, we can certainly move into the sections of the canon. But there we go. Somebody did. Thank you, Gary.
So, yes, Gary, please identify yourself and the congregation you are from.
Gary Hogue from St. Thomas's Parish in Croom. The general theme is, why are we different? Why have we evolved to be different? Or why did we not evolve, I guess, is the thought process for this relative to the other dioceses around the country. And what are some of the negative aspects that have been raised relative to this from the deliberations that are going on throughout the diocese?
So
it's a great question, Gary. Thank you. You know, we were asking that question of our diocesan historiographer, tapping into Paul Cooney's wisdom from his knowledge of the Diocese of Washington. And none of them could remember a time when this diocese had a canon such as this to help. Of course, the fears, you ask about the negative aspects of the proposal, and I'm glad you do, because it does seem like there is a number of fears and anxieties raised around this, because it sounds like, quote, the diocese is going to come marching in and do something to us. Of course, we know that we are the diocese just as much as whatever we think the diocese is the diocese. But that should also be said that I'm grateful we had this conversation and are having this conversation now, because the advisory committee looked across the board in the Diocese of Washington. Strangely enough, is nearly entirely alone among the entire Episcopal Church in not having a canon like this. However, having this conversation now, given what we know about everything cultural and the state of voluntary organizations and congregations and church going, now we can have the conversation in a way that actually raised up a more kind of collaborative, connective work throughout the diocese, because you would be astonished that so many of the dioceses which have canons like this, they give everything to the bishop, quote, the bishop shall handle it. Right now, the Diocese of Washington is blessed with having a great bishop, but why would you just lay everything on one individual's discretion and shoulders? So I love the fact that we were able to have this conversation now, because what we came out with was a much more collaborative process by which discernment would be arrived together with the local congregation, together with the leadership bodies of the diocese, and together with the bishop.
Thank you, Greg. So we have a comment and question from Charles. Charles, if you would unmute and tell us your name and your parish, please.
It's Charles Day, St. John's Broad Creek, Fort Washington, Maryland. I did type it in for you to read, though.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering what consideration will be given to the pandemic that's impacted all of us, I'm sure. And it's not the same as 2 years ago, even.
No.
Not sure what's going to happen in 2 years from. How do we do this constructively when we have too many shaky parts in the solution?
Thank you.
Go for it, Christian.
I could add something here. Having come across the country to Southern Maryland from the Diocese of California, we indeed have a very strong canon there. And yet the bishop, the standing committee, the executive council, their version of diocesan council, very much worked with my little parish, which was small, which was struggling, and we continued after the retirement of our rector. I served there for 5 years, only as a deacon before my ordination to the priesthood. And yet we found new life, new ministry. We grew, things got done. We couldn't have done that alone. We did that in partnership. And that, again, when I came here, I would say to you, though, these challenges are greater now in the pandemic, but the reality of life for small parishes always involves a partnership. And that's very much what we were asking for with this canon.
Well, and your question, Charles, about the pandemic, certainly we know that our metrics are down and will be down. And we look forward to growing. And obviously, like Father Christian says, growing together in some coordinated way, as we know we are. However, I really appreciate that this canon took a look at very broad trend lines, not specific metrics. We did have that conversation, and unanimously the advisory committee said we do not want to incorporate specific metrics, dollars and cents, or numbers of people in pews, or this or that. So we're looking at broad trend lines, and of course recognizing that the trend lines have been dramatically interrupted in the last 12 to 18 months and will remain interrupted likewise. But nevertheless, I think we can still get a sense of where we all are, just in a broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you want to be careful not measuring the wind speed during a storm.
Yeah.
Coming up with an average.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. It's a good question, Charles. Thank you. Reverend Linda.
I apologize. I've already gotten an F in the Q&A listening session because I didn't type in Q first. So I apologize for that, but I have a question as opposed to a comment. I understand the part about the
Reverend Linda,
request.
which parish are you from?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm from Trinity, Upper Marlboro.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me, Peter. I understand where the request will come from the diocesan council, but I'm wondering who will be the body that will actually conduct the vitality assessments? Will that be someone internally from the diocese, or will we hire contractors, consultants to conduct the assessments?
Good question. In section 5405, subsection B, it describes the membership of that committee. It's called the Committee on Assessment of Health and Vitality. And it's by definition a cross-representative committee. So the answer to your question specifically, Linda, is it'll be us. It's any number of clerical individuals and lay individuals of an approximate number of the clerical individuals appointed. And then the paragraph 2 and 3 includes further that it'll include the Committee of Finance for Diocesan Council, the Committee on Investments, the Committee on Audits, as well as parish representatives. And the council is the one that appoints this large, well, not large, but not unseemly large, but a collaborative small working group.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Greg, we have a question from Rose. Rose Cephas.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Rose Cephas. I am from Trinity, Upper Marlboro also. My question is, would the vitality assessment be conducted prior to the search committee being formed? At this juncture, we have, I believe she's our priest in charge, Reverend Linda. And we just formed, a new vestry pretty much. And I mean, I actually have two questions, but the first one is, at what point is that vitality assessment? Should it be done before we get a search committee or after we get a search committee?
We've had this question from another congregation in Southern Maryland, and this would be great if we can adopt and accept this canon or a canon like this, because frankly, we're using the same language. It's language about health and vitality. So right now, when a congregation is thinking about going into search, the Reverend Dr. Robert Phillips, who's on this call, will come down and talk to you. Well, he'll Zoom with you and talk to you about health and vitality. And then we have, meanwhile, this other canon, which is by definition and by intent using those same markers of health and vitality. So I can imagine a brilliantly coordinated future in which we have this canon as well as the leadership of Bishop Marianne and her staff working collaboratively together, because it would all be a seamless part of the whole. Whether a congregation is in search or thinking about search or wants to consider a new direction, all kinds of possibilities. But this would tie all the work that's already happening in search processes and leading up to search processes together with everything else about our common life and ministry.
Thank you.
Rose, did you have another question?
Yes, I did, but I did not put it in the chat. Do I need to put it in the chat before I ask the question?
No, please just ask it.
Okay, so my next question has to do with how would the vitality assessment be done? Would it be done both with interviews, surveys? What tools would be used for the vitality assessment once the go-ahead is given for one to be done?
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
really, I think it would, the way we've described it in the canon, and again, this is section 5405, and you're really looking at subsection D and following. Of course, there would be open examination of all records, financial contracts, real property records, employment records. But if, this would also really involve the, just the relational conversation-based approach to how are you, how are things, how are we really? Because of course the members of this committee, if so appointed by council, I mean, they are us, clergy and lay leaders from around our diocese.
Because when I was reading it, it wasn't clear as to what tools, would be used. I saw the makeup of the committee, but again, I didn't see clearly what methods would be used. So again, thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Rose, for your questions. At this time, and in the interest of time, I think we should move to the specific subsections of the canon. So we'd like to focus now on sections 5401, 02, and 03. These sections cover definitions. They cover the application to the parishes and the initiation of the canon. Whoa. Here we are. Okay. So if you have any feedback or questions on this, please, it might be better if you just type Q or C and I'll call on you. Okay, Reverend Catherine, if you would please identify yourself and your parish and ask your question.
Thanks, Peter. I'm Catherine Gibson. I'm from Christ Church, Durham Parish. This may be too weedy of a question, but I just was puzzled. I know in general terms what a parish is and what a mission congregation is, but what's a separate congregation? That's my question.
So I wonder if our chancellor might answer that.
Sure. This is John Vanderwert. I serve as the chancellor of the diocese and also in that capacity served with the advisory committee in developing the canon. So the status of separate congregation is a historical remnant in the diocese, and it essentially refers to a church that operates in all respects as a parish, but it does not have geographical parish boundaries. And that situation developed for historical reasons in different parts of the diocese, both in DC as well as in Southern Maryland and in other places. And so our canons treat them as equivalent for all purposes. It's just that the separate congregations don't have geographical parish boundaries.
Thank you.
There is one of them in Southern Maryland, is that correct?
There's at least one.
That sounds right, Greg, but I'd have to go consult my list to say that.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Richard. Richard, please unmute. Or it's Rick and Mary. Maybe it's Mary.
Sorry about that. No, it's Richard. I just
Thank
had
you.
a problem shifting a cat off my lap. So anyway, my question is, What
Richard, where are
is
you
the,
from? What parish are you with?
my apologies. My name is Richard Posey. I'm also from Christ Church, Durham Parish,
Thank
St.
you.
Parishes, Reverend Catherine. My question was, what is the
I think you cut out, Richard.
my question is, what is the trigger for this whole process?
Ah, good question.
I mean, how does the ball get? Yeah, how does it get?
So you're asking about section 5403. Could we scroll a little bit up,
That is
please?
correct.
A little bit further so we can read all of 03. Thank you. Okay, so hand that over to Father Christian or Father Greg.
Well, Father Christian is leading Compline now, so he told us he'd pray for us, so we're grateful for that. He'll be back shortly, so I'll hold the stick for now. It's a great question, Richard, and thank you. Section 5403 really hangs on section 5404, about which we'll consider shortly, which has a number of meat on it, or the greater degree of meat on it, I guess. But so that, yeah, what is the trigger? The trigger is that those persons who submit to council, as you see in B, the bishop, the standing committee, or any member of the council, including an ex officio member of the council, may hear something, have been approached by someone, may think of something themselves, and so then they bring it forward based on the criteria in the section to come.
Thank you. And we have, Kim is telling us that Trinity Upper Marlboro is the only separate congregation in Southern Maryland. Thank you, Kim.
Thanks, Kim.
Any other questions about these three subsections? Okay, seeing none, let's move on in our text to section 5404. This is about the assessment of parish vitality.
This one's a long one, so it's hard to fit on the page. So I'll scroll after a moment.
Thank you.
Have a chance to look.
Thank you. Okay, as we, okay, very good. We have a question from Liz. Liz, if you would unmute and tell us your name and the parish you are from.
Hi, my name is Liz Swan. I'm from Trinity Parish in Newport. And actually, my question actually went back to section 5402 under the separate congregations and parishes.
Yes, that's fine.
So in our particular case, we have yoked parishes where we actually have two churches within one parish. How is that handled? I mean, would you look at those separately, or would you look at those as combined? How?
So I will, I think at first I'm going to ask the chancellor to address that.
Sure. So the way that the canon would apply would be to apply to the legal parish. So if it's technically one parish, registered with the diocese, then the canon would apply and look at the parish as a whole. If they're two separate parishes that are just operating in a yoked relationship, then they would be looked at separately.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from Scott. So Scott, if you would identify yourself and the parish you're from.
Scott Shannon with St. Paul's in Baden. And my question is, I understand kind of what the rule is, but at this point, what is the real reasoning for this? I mean, have there been problems, or is this an issue? Things getting away from the diocese, or it's been this way for 100 years. What's the emphasis on pushing this now?
I open that one up to either of our bishops or folks on the committee.
Well, I'll pass it to the committee because it was a committee-driven or a lay and clergy-driven process that brought the proposal to the convention floor last year that a task force be proposed.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Great question, Scott. In fact, this really had a lot of Southern Maryland all over it. This rose up in a series of conversations with clergy and lay leaders throughout Southern Maryland. And if you look back at the original context, it's got a lot of Southern Maryland names on it, about which I'm very proud. Why now? Because I don't think we want to go too much further without wrapping our arms around each other so that we can support and help all communities be as vital and vibrant in their context as possible. In terms of Southern Maryland, I just pulled up a little fact sheet I was looking at even 4 years ago, from 2005 to 2015. So I was looking in 2016, but I'm sure the trend lines only got more challenging from 16 to 20, and then of course very challenging in 20. But like in Charles and St. Mary's counties, the total number of Episcopalians in that 10-year period dropped from 0.2% of the population to 0.16% of the population. There was a 20% loss in plate and pledge revenue in all 22 parishes. The overall amount dedicated to clergy compensation was 33% less. There were 14% fewer celebrations of Holy Eucharist on Sundays in 2015 than in 2005. 24% decrease in total baptized membership, 40% drop in average Sunday attendance, 493 fewer pledging units in 2015 than in 2005. A 16% reduction in clergy in the region, or clergy who were able to accept calls in the region. So just in that 10-year period, right pre-COVID, things were sliding downward, but downward so gently that none of us were really feeling it too badly. We know that COVID and the years leading up to it have dealt a real blow, but I, as someone who genuinely feels called to Southern Maryland and loves this community and loves the Episcopal Church, I want us to find a way to have this conversation about being, a unified support system for all of our congregations, because I just love the fact that in every one of our communities, from Ridge, Maryland, all the way up to Upper Marlboro, there's an Episcopal Church presence. So the question is, if we're facing these headwinds, how can we wrap our arms around each other to be a greater support so that we can move forward together in a more robust future, and frankly, a future in which I believe God would be more delighted with a more vibrant, faithful, courageous Episcopal Church.
All right, thank you. I appreciate the explanation.
So, and Reverend Kate has a comment.
Well, and I believe there have been some situations, I'm sorry, Kate Heichler, Christ Church in La Plata and Christ Church Wayside. There have been some situations where parishes have been very, very challenged, perhaps sometimes very conflicted, out of resources, and with no mechanism for helping them either move to health or make other decisions. The resources they've had have just been used until they ran out, and it hasn't. There's been no healing, no nothing. So there have been conflicted and painful situations that might have been avoided with a canon like this, and parishes that might have been helped with a canon like this. So I think that's also one of the reasons that this is coming into being.
Thank you, Kate. I think we probably should move on to canon section 5405.
You might want to note before we leave here that there are 12, so these are the non-metric evaluative criteria, and there are 12 of them. And they are by definition really broad. You will not see anything about specific numbers in them. And there's no equation for if you get 1 but you don't get 11. So it's all of these taken together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Greg. We seemed to have had several observations and questions about the vitality assessment earlier, and so now we are actually in this section. So the floor is open for further questions and observations. So Bishop Mary Ann has a question.
I do. Thank you, Peter. I'm really struck in section A with the first clause, if the council approves a request submitted, because I think the biggest fear that any of us would feel is that the request was somehow made with ill will, or was capricious, or that had some sort of agenda for the congregation, either from wherever the request came, right? And so I wonder, in terms of how the committee thought about how the council would decide whether or not to honor the request. Like how would we, I'm curious if there was any conversation about that. Like, what is the standard for the request itself, so the diocese could be at ease that it wasn't just made because somebody was mad or wanted something from, the fears that I hear often about why, so I'm just curious, how would the council decide that?
Yeah, it was for that reason that so much of this has been given to the council, right? If the convention of the diocese is the body that either makes or merges a parish, then it should be the convention of the diocese, which in the other 364 days of the year when the convention is not in session, the council, which then, right, has the responsibility to respond and to listen. But of course, that's why all of this is to the council, which is a wide and diverse leadership body of lay leaders and clergy leaders from all over our diocesan community. And then this question being put before them, number one, I can't imagine it would ever be an easy question. And so the council itself would go through a measured and protracted way to kind of hear what's happening and consider it prayerfully, but also take their own time with it. I think the slow, gradual nature of this, frankly, more dioceses around their church should consider how smart we were.
Okay, any questions? Any further questions here on 5405? Thank you. So let's move on now to 06 and 07. Recommendations of the council. This is about transmitting the report to parish vestry. A comment for recommendations. I would like to point out that 5406 subsection B, opportunity to comment, might also flesh out what we were just talking about. Before the council takes any action, the council shall provide an opportunity to comment by clergy, by vestry, or any individual designated by the vestry. Can we scroll down a little? So this section, as you can see, lays out several different steps that might be taken in the recommendations. So I'll open the chat for Q&A. Gary, please identify yourself and your parish again.
Gary Hogue, St. Thomas's Parish in Croom. This goes back to where we were a few months ago, Father Peter. The third line under that about the who would be authorized. Let's see, I'm trying to remember the exact wording on that, but an individual who is designated by the vestry to represent the vestry. So this is am I to understand that this is a person who is speaking on behalf of the vestry. They are to be synchronized with the vestry, I guess, in my thought process for that. Is that correct how I'm interpreting that? If not that, then why is the vestry not participating themselves in that? Well,
Greg,
previously any member of the vestry, but I guess the three is what I was questioning.
Right, Greg?
Right, so you're right, Gary, it would be any cleric, any member of the vestry, or any individual designated by the vestry to represent the vestry.
To me, it sounds like this is someone deputized by the vestry to speak to council.
Yes.
Does that
Okay,
help?
thank you. Yep. Thanks.
And there's an and there between 2 and 3, so it can be some mixture of all.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this section? Let's move on to 07. Actions by the ecclesiastical authority. That's a very fancy canonical term, the ecclesiastical authority. If the chancellor could explain that for us in a few words.
9 times out of 10, that means the bishop, but it covers the situation where the office of bishop is vacant, in which case typically the standing committee would have authority to act.
Thank you. So the floor is open. So Scott, if you would identify yourself and your parish again.
Okay, Scott Shannon with St. Paul's in Baden. So back up a little further where it was saying that any member of the vestry can respond to an issue or anything. So what if you have different points of view in a vestry? How is the committee going to handle something like that? Are they going to necessarily take sides? They're going to listen, they're going to referee it, or I can, number 2, it says any member of the vestry of the affected parish.
Thank you.
So if you have, you know what I'm saying, if you have different points of view in a vestry, which naturally you do, is that going to get into a he said, she said thing? And how will the council handle something like that?
Father Greg.
So I would imagine that that would come out in the process of listening and receiving and working through this report. If that were the case, right, this is also in response, this section 5406 is what to do when a report, a nominal initial report, has been making its way through council. But before that report becomes approved, there's another round of listening. And so I don't think at this point the council or the committee or diocesan leadership would be refereeing a disagreement, but rather receiving it and hearing all sides, and just understanding that in moments of transition, it's actually good to have people who want to be, so much farther forward, or people who say, you know what, I feel called to be loyal to this congregation and yet kind of opposed to this, and would, to the degree that council and the diocesan leadership can keep all parties at the table and enable them to live into the fullness of their calling in their local congregation, that's the goal, not to settle a dispute or pick sides.
All right. Yeah, I see that, but I mean, if a parish is at this point where they're this dysfunctional to be at this level, then you have different factions in the parish. It just seems that there should be some kind of mechanism here for some type of resolution, or who the council will listen to, as far as instead of just getting in the middle of something they can't get out of.
Yeah.
It's John Vanderwert, the chancellor again. I think one thing to note here is that this part of the canon comes after the committee has prepared its report. So the committee has gone through the process of meeting with the people at the parish, taking a look at books and records, going through that whole process, and has prepared a formal report to the council. This is then an opportunity for the members of the vestry, the clerics, to comment on the report so that the council has a way to get that viewpoint directly in case someone feels that that wasn't captured in the report. So it's not intended to rehash the whole situation. It's just intended to make sure that the people on the vestry, the clergy working in the parish, have that opportunity to have their voice heard directly to council as well.
Thank you. We have a comment or question from Charles. Charles, if you would identify yourself again.
Charles Day, St. John's, Broad Creek. In lieu of this process of identifying which parishes you work with and come up with the vitality assessment, has a more basic process been considered for a general assessment consistent with the annual audit process for all parishes to see the better places to start? Is that not a good question?
I'm just waiting to see who the moderator is going to call on.
I wasn't on the task force, so I'm not sure about it.
Is Bishop Marianne, I'd like to speak to that. One of the realities of our life as a diocese is that we have a canonical requirement for annual audits, but we don't have any mechanism for, we have no authority to enact. There's no consequence to a congregation that the bishop's office or the diocesan council or the standing committee can place on a congregation if they don't fulfill that commitment. Unless they're in a leadership transition and we make that a requirement of their transition. But we're working with a congregation right now that hasn't had audits for the last 5 years, and that's just, there was no mechanism of enforcing that. So one of the realities of our diocese is that there are all kinds of policies and best practices that are enshrined in our canons, but there is no mechanism for accountability. And so I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Father Greg, but I think that was part of the momentum behind this conversation. And it's noteworthy to me because as your bishop, I really, there is really, every congregation has all the privileges of being a congregation, but there are no consequences for not living up to those responsibilities of being a congregation, and no enforcement. And I'm not saying that having a lot of enforcement is a good idea, but we could do that, but we couldn't enforce it, if you know what I'm saying. So.
Well, it looks like it could be a lot of work going on here with this process of recommending, forming the teams, and then finding out that, okay, there were 20 other parishes of the 98 that might have been better prospects to look to do the mission and the merging and all of the things we've always talked about on a more amicable basis, as opposed to someone in the parish recommending versus someone on the council,
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you. And I feel like this is not something that would be, the broad-based effort around congregational vitality is the driving engine of the diocese. This is one particular.
It's some serious stuff. Yeah, there's no question. Would it be a benefit to get some data that we can at least see relative to all other churches before people start on this endeavor and trying to identify which ones you work with? You understand? For instance, Greg just gave a very good recap. I tried to write as much as I could down since 2006, was it?
I'll send it to you, Charles.
Yeah, maybe that's a good basis to compare notes. If you have more detail, that might be a better answer to the question.
Sure.
Okay, thank you for that.
But your question about audits, and to your point, Bishop Marianne, you're exactly right. We know congregations who don't submit audits, and that's why that is a piece of one of those considerations for assessment in section 5404. Number 9 is that you're in compliance, so you've submitted audits, you prepare financial statements, but exactly like Bishop Marianne said. So what if a congregation has not done an audit for 10 years? We can do nothing with that reality except that they haven't submitted an audit for 10 years, and probably they won't submit another one for another 10. Also, for audits, I mean, our audits, at least spelled out in the Manual of Business Affairs in the Episcopal Church, they're really internal control audits. They're making sure that there's sufficient checks and balances, and that not one person is signing and authorizing checks. Those are really helpful audits for nonprofit corporations, faith-based organizations such as ours, right? Internal controls. Audits, we don't have that level of sophisticated financial auditing where we really know how much you have in your bank account at St. John's Broad Creek versus St. George's Valley Lee.
Thank you. So Reverend Kate has an observation which may be helpful. Kate?
I did, there was more clarifying. We don't have a big process to go finding and sorting through these. This is a canon to help deal with emerging situations.
Yes.
Where there's no mechanism for doing that, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah.
Your wording, though, I thought was very helpful. We're not going to be trolling for situations.
Right. But I don't know if that helped Mr. Day will that was more.
Well, I'm still trying to digest
address
what you
this.
said. Did I give you the impression that this is going to come over as?
I may have misunderstood.
Okay.
I'm not following yours, so that makes us even.
Okay, so let's move on to sections 3, 4, 5, and 6. Or the amendments. Yeah. So these would be canonical amendments to our diocesan canons.
And we're very grateful for the work of the Constitution and Canons Committee, as led by the able Tony Coe, who is, we're just going to start calling you a Southern Marylander, Tony, because we know the rest of your heart is in St. Mary's County, but your body is sometimes in Kensington.
Tony or John, our Chancellor, is there anything you wanted to add about these sections?
It's John Vanderwoord. I would just add that these are largely to conform some of the existing provisions in our canons to this. They're not major changes in themselves. They're just to fit things together in a better way.
Thank you. So we are pretty much through the text. We hope that if we use this, that it would be effective in February 1st next year. Are there any further questions or observations?
Actually, Peter, if I could just interrupt, sorry, this is Andrew again. If this proposed canon is adopted at the special convention on April 17th, it would go into effect on April 18th of this year. So that is a typo that you see there in the canon, and I apologize for that.
Thank you. It's an important clarification. Thank you. I believe Gary has a question.
This is Kathy.
Kathy. I don't see.
Join the meeting.
No. Gary?
I'll go ahead and ask, being the troublemaker that I am at times. Gary Hogue, St. Thomas's Parish in Croom. How many other dioceses around the country are operating under the same construct as we are currently operating under now?
Reverend Greg?
We could find very few. I would defer to Bishop Chilton and Bishop Marianne, who know much more about this.
Bishop Chilton, do you want to address this?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I don't know of a single diocese that has no provision like this one. Obviously, dioceses differ in terms of stipulations and process and the flow of it. But I honestly think I have a pretty broad picture of the church, and I don't know of a diocese that does not have something like this. Mind you, I'm not saying this identical with the provisions exactly as we see them here, but there is some canonical provision in every diocese I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
I might add, if I could, there's an interesting correspondence between the dioceses that have been quick to adopt something like this and the number of struggling situations. So, for example, the Diocese of Alaska was very quick to adopt this kind of clarity because they realize everybody depends on everybody else, and when everybody's healthy, it's good for the whole. So just a quick observation about the sort of motivation.
Thank you, Bishop Chilton.
Peter, could I add something to that as well?
Yes, please, Christian.
Christian Lehrer, St. Paul's Baden, member of the advisory committee. Compared to, again, this conversation began in Southern Maryland at a meeting of clergy. And I remember very distinctly just being so surprised at how different the situation was here. In the Diocese of California, the canon is much stronger than this. It doesn't allow for this kind of a collaborative process that is so flexible. That happens, but it happens at the bequest of the ordinary. Because there, if a parish does not meet a required diocesan minimum salary for a rector, it can be immediately moved from parish to mission. Again, it isn't even, it simply always has been that way. How it is used in practice is, of course, quite different. What the members of the committee most wanted was to build a collaborative process where, in fact, we could help each other. And indeed, that is my hope for this canon. And I just wish to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Gary, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I'm sorry to keep bothering. This is Gary from St. Thomas's again. Are there any metrics as to how well our diocese is performing, respective of the stability of our parishes, vice that of other parishes where, as was just discussed out in California, that might have a stronger canon than this? Any comparison on that, or is that apples and oranges? But anything that's similar to what we are, or not? Yep.
I would ask our bishops to comment.
I'm not aware of any, Gary. I'm not aware of any. I guess I just want to say one more time that this isn't a, tools like this, even in the strongest of dioceses, in terms of the language, are used very rarely, right? Very, very rarely. And so, because there just aren't, there's nothing to be gained by using something like this in a power grabbing sort of way. It just doesn't happen, right? But the concern is always the loss of autonomy, and so I understand that, you know. But I think it's really important to have this conversation. But the number of times that it would be wise or even thought of to use something like this relative to the ways we're trying to engage one another through the more invitational aspects of the strategic plan are really rare. And as I said before, the unfortunate thing is that when, and I bet you could name in your own history some of the congregations that that you might think of, that it might have been helpful just to have had a little bit of pressure to do something that was hard, that some in the congregation didn't want to do. Right? Sometimes having a canon like this would allow people to have on their own challenging conversations, because they knew that there was they would rather do it by themselves than have someone from the outside do it. Do you know what I mean? And so I think there's a preventative aspect of this as well, that just having it, I'm just guessing about this, right? But just having it might change the way conversations happen in a congregation because it's there, right? That would be my, just knowing people, that would be my, if I knew that, that's what I would do, right? But that's just something that has occurred to me as I've thought about this, that it would actually make it easier for leaders in a congregation to lead in a funny sort of way. So.
Thank you, Bishop. We have a comment from Gail. Gail, if you could identify yourself and your parish.
Yes, I'm Gail Russell from Christchurch, Clinton. And we are about to embark on the search process for a new priest very soon. And so in that regard, I had a conversation on Tuesday with Reverend Dr. Phillips, and it was a wonderful conversation. I had been rather leery of having to go through the vitality survey and all of those things. But after talking with him, I did a complete 180 on my feelings about that. And I now am pleased to be able to partner with the diocese to take a look at ourselves and where we are and who we are and how we might be better, and also use all of that to help us find just the right person to come in as our clergy to help us to do these things. And to know that, even if some things are hard, to realize that the diocese doesn't want to rip us apart. They want to lift us up and help us do these hard things and take the steps we need to take. So I'm looking forward to engaging in this process. And I wanted people to understand that you shouldn't be afraid of it. It's a wonderful tool to be able to use it and know that the diocese is partnering with you, not fighting against you.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for your questions, for your time, for your observations. Our last bit of business is to ask Reverend Andrew to address us, our canon to the ordinary, about the steps between now and the special convention in April.
Thank you, Peter. Hello again, everyone. As I said earlier, I am the diocesan staff liaison to the advisory committee, and I've been busy taking notes tonight. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments. If you have not had a chance to ask something or comment on the way that you would like tonight, or as you reflect on what's been discussed tonight and you have a follow-up question or comment, the advisory committee would love to hear that from you. So I'm going to first ask if Keely, could you share, we have a slide just with the timeline regarding the process that will take us from tonight to the special convention. Let me wait a moment while we load up that timeline. This listening session tonight is our first of 5 listening sessions that will take place around the diocese. The last listening session will take place on Thursday, March 25th. Then, as I just said, if you have additional questions or comments, the advisory committee would love to hear from you. And the best way to do that would be to email me directly. And you can see my email address there on the screen, awalter@edow.org. Or, of course, you can always email the deans and they know how to get in touch with me. But please, if you do have additional thoughts, the advisory committee wants to hear from you. Then on Tuesday, April 6th, the advisory committee will be meeting to digest all of the feedback that we're hearing throughout these listening sessions and to discuss whether or not the text of the proposed canon should be tweaked or amended in any way prior to the special convention. If the advisory committee feels that the canon would be better and more effective if it was tweaked or amended slightly, they would make that recommendation, and then the canons committee would meet on Thursday, April 8th to take the recommendations from the advisory committee and put it into the sort of the right canonical language. Then on Monday, April 12th, we will have the final draft of the proposed canon ready, and we will publish that. And I will make sure that a link to that final draft is circulated to all of you. From that Monday, the 12th, through Thursday, April 15th, we will have a window for those delegates to convention, clergy or lay delegates to convention, who would like to submit a written amendment to the canon ahead of time. There will be an online form which will enable you to submit that written amendment. And again, I would circulate that link to you on Monday, April 12th. If you want to submit amendment but can't meet that window, amendments from the floor are accepted on the day of the convention, which is Saturday, April 17th. And you will get more information about registering for the special convention in another couple of weeks. So that's the timeline. And again, most importantly now, if you do have additional questions or comments, please let me know or let one of the deans know. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And I see there have been a few more comments, supportive notations in our chat. Thank you to those who have posted them. And Reverend Greg, is there anything else you might want to share?
I'll be very quick, I promise. I know it's near the time, but I just want to share this story that I always think about when I drive up and down the road. So it's David Booth Beers, our one-time chancellor of this diocese and chancellor to the presiding bishop, shared this story about Bishop John Walker when he was elected suffragan of the Diocese of Washington. He was suffragan to Bishop Creighton. And when John Walker was elected bishop, Bishop Creighton evidently assigned him Southern Maryland. And so David Booth Beers told the story that one time he was driving and Bishop Walker was in the passenger seat, and Bishop Walker was kind of nodding off a little bit, and he fell asleep a little bit. And he woke up and he said, "Oh, David, turn right at that tree." And then he went back to sleep. And sure, David turned right at the tree. And as you know, that's how we give directions around here, right? You turn right at that tree, or you turn left at that the shop that used to be there, right? And sure enough, David, he was, I think, young and the chancellor, and he said, it was just amazing. I turned right at that tree, and then there was the church right there. And the bishop just kind of slept the whole time, except for the one time he woke up to give helpful directions. And it was really that genuine love of Southern Maryland that I think kept Bishop Walker so connected to these congregations down here, and these congregations truly loved him. I just think about that story all the time when I'm driving up, because I'm coming from farther south and coming up, but every time I drive by, I just think about you and your congregations, and I just love the fact that we are 21 parishes with, I think, 27 houses of worship in nearly every little corner of Southern Maryland. And I just, I'm driving past Trinity and I think of you, Liz, and I'm driving past St. Paul's and I think of Maria and the good folks there. And I'm driving, through Croom and I think of Peter and Gary. And, just to the degree that we can stay as connected as we are and as in love with our places where God has planted us and able to do ministry. That's what this canon's really about. This canon is really about helping the people who feel called to be in our place, love our place, love our people, and do the work that we're called to do. And to the degree that the diocese, or our diocese as it were, can help with the heavy lifting of things which none of us need to lift and carry ourselves, that's what this canon is also about. So I'm just so grateful for our time together, for this process of listening, and just for the genuine love you have for these places that you call home and the homes that we call church. Thanks.
Thank you, Reverend Greg. Reverend Andrew, are we ready to close for the evening?
I think so. Unless there are any final questions, or unless Bishop Marianne wants to say any final words, I think, and I see her shaking her head no.
I wouldn't go after what Greg said.
Yeah, I mean,
that was.
Very good. Well then, let us close in prayer. So it's been a long day and a longish, but a very good meeting. And this wonderful old prayer just seems just right for tonight. Let us pray. O Lord, support us all the day long until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over and our work is done. Then in your mercy, grant us a safe lodging, a holy rest, and peace at the last. We ask this for your love's sake. Amen.
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 Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.